So one of the things I found myself thinking about over the past 24 hours as we've discussed these questions of lifelong, life-wide education has been about starting points. I think questions about starting points are often a bit misleading. I mean, we sometimes get caught up in asking, what's the proper starting point for theological reflection? Or more broadly, we might ask, what's the proper starting point for theological education, formal theological education in a TEI? Or in a more academic vein, we might ask, what's the proper starting point for theological method? But those things don't start, or rather they started a long time ago. We're in the midst always of an ongoing process of living and thinking and learning. The people who enter theological education are in the midst of a lifelong process of living and thinking and learning. The people entering a particular bit of theological reflection are in the midst of a lifelong process of living and thinking and learning and reflecting. The starting point of a particular exercise is always a secondary starting point. It's a starting point in the midst of things, in the middle of things, in the middle of an ongoing process. So instead of thinking about starting points, which I think encourages us to think of theological education as a thing in itself, I think we should be thinking about theological education as a kind of intervention. I'm not sure that's the right word. It can sound a bit aggressive. It can sound very much like something being done to someone, but I can't at the moment come up with a better word. Think of theological reflection as an intervention, an episode in a longer process. It's there to help move an ongoing process on further. It's there to connect to what's already happening and do something for the people involved. I think you can think of that in terms of the individual learner who comes into theological education, the way that theological education is an intervention in their life, connecting to what's already happening and moving it further in some way. I think you can also think about it in relation to the life of the particular communities of which that person is a part. That person coming from those communities into theological education in a formal way, in a TEI, is an intervention in the life of those communities, multiple communities of which that person is a part, their family, their local church, the wider church that surrounds them, the local communities of which they are a part, the professions of which they are a part, and so on. It's an intervention in those communities. And it's also an intervention in the life of the church as a whole. It is in some way, a small way, a particular way, moving forward the ongoing life of the church as a whole, of which this person is a part. So when we think about theological education, when we try to conceptualize theological education, seeing it as an intervention, an episode in an ongoing story is, I think, crucial. That's quite separate from the question of the character of that intervention, what it does to affirm what's already there in that person's life, what it does to question it or challenge it, what it does to draw them out into wider connections than they've perhaps been involved in before, what it does to root them more deeply in the foundational realities of the faith. It can be doing any and all of those things and a mixture of them. But it's never something that simply starts. It's always an episode in an ongoing story.